know we are presuming on your patience, but if you would bear with us, talk to your friends for 10 minutes. We will probably start at 10 to 6 when most people are here, but this is entirely our fault. Now, I could use a vulgarism, but I won't, so I will just say stuff happens. So I apologize, and I apologize to everyone, and just use this time to talk to your friends and colleagues, and we will start in 10 minutes. So, oh, good. So now this is the second good evening of the evening, and I'm glad actually out of every misfortune there is benefit. So people have actually had a chance to talk to one another. But we are ready to start. This is one of the really special evenings at the Monk School of Global Affairs. The Lionel Gelber Prize is one of the jewels in our crown, frankly. It celebrates the very best writing in the English language on an international issue. And every year, the jurors have a treat because they review some of the very, very best books that are written. They're histories, they are contemporary events, they range very, very widely. And from among that feast, they pick 5 shortlisted books. And it's always interesting to hear jurors and the reasons they give. Please come in. And then they have to choose a winner. And I always say with jurors, the really rewarding piece is to be shortlisted for a book. When you think of the number of books written on global issues, to be one of 5 written in the English language is itself, I think, a testament to some of the extraordinary writers that we have. Our jury chair, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, will tell you about these books. But I have to say it was special this year. This is an international prize with an international jury, and yet we happen to have, and it was just that, we just happened to have 2 Canadians, one of whom is sitting in front of you. So I think that has to make us feel very proud of the quality of writers that we have in this country, who are among the very best in the world. Let me just say a word to the Gelber family. We have 3 of Lionel's nieces with us this evening. We have Patty Rubin, we have Nance Gelber, and we have Judith Gelber. We are unfortunately missing Sarah Charney. Her mother-in-law died 2 days ago, and so she's not here. She is the president of the Lionel Gelber Foundation. But I think on behalf of all of you, I would like to express to her family condolences and say again how sorry we are that she is not with us tonight. This family has made an extraordinary contribution to this country. Not only through the Lionel Gelber Prize, but in many other areas. I think if you know what we colloquially call, just because it makes life easier, the 4 Gelber sisters, you will know the many, many ways in which each one of them has contributed to the arts, to society, to so many issues in this country. They have endowed this prize in memory of their uncle, and we will hear more about him in a minute. But I say very often when people ask me, we just need more Gelbers in Canada with that same sense of public spiritedness and contribution to the society as a whole. And I must add, because in some parts of my life I am a writer as well as are all my academic colleagues, it is just wonderful to have people at the Monk School who care deeply about writing and who care deeply about the quality of writing. So again, on behalf of everyone here, my thanks to all the members of the Gelber family. I am going to ask Nance Gelber to come up for a moment and tell us just a little bit about the prize and about the man whom we remember, Lionel Gelber, whose name graces the prize. Nance?
I have to change my glasses. Okay. Thank you, Janice. Very generous, very kind. My name is Nance Gelber, as Janice says, and welcome to this wonderful room in the Monk School at the end of what has been a bright, sunny, and moderately warmish day in Toronto. We've been waiting for it for a while. The winters are very gray here these days. We're here in this room to congratulate Professor Sheila Grant, the winning author of the Lionel Gelber Prize for her book, Polar Imperative, A History of Arctic Sovereignty in North America. We're lucky to be here with Professor Janice Stein, who is director of the Monk School of Global Affairs, who has shepherded this prize with the Gelber family at her side for many years. She has been confessor, troubleshooter, and friend, and we sincerely thank her. In about a week, Professor Grant, you will meet our second partner located in Washington, Foreign Policy Magazine, whose new editor, Susan Glasser, following the path of her predecessor, Moises Naim, has moved this prize along south of the 49th parallel. It is fair to say also, I believe, that our communication team of June Dickinson, who is sitting over there in the red, with her partner Alana Rabinowitz for this prize, have worked marvelously well with the staff of both the Monk School and Foreign Policy Magazine to get our message out there. In fact, we now can be located at Facebook and Twitter, as well as on the Monk site and at the magazine. This new world of social media, Professor Grant, is most useful to the book prize because the main tenets of its message are truly enhanced by this sort of broad access and communication. Lionel Gelber founded this prize so that literate writing on current issues of foreign affairs or international relations was accessible to all. This vision of his is closely guarded by the family because we believe that we will have a better world if people understand what is happening around them and why it is happening around them. So, Professor Grant, speaking of geography, of which there is vast mileage in your book, if I may have a personal comment for a moment to say that I have been north of 60, and I have even slept at Tuktoyaktuk. And my husband, who knows how fussy I am about hotels, could hardly believe it. My sisters, Patty Rubin and Judith Gelber, who are here this evening, are most happy that a Canadian has won this prize this year. You are only the second Canadian, the first being Michael Ignatieff in 1994 for Blood and Belonging, which spoke of nationalism in quite a different way. We do not know if you harbor any secret desires to lead a political party, Professor Grant, but having you with us tonight at the Monk School is a real treat. Welcome and congratulations.
Thank you very, very much, Nance. There are so many wonderful friends of the Gelber family and of the Gelber Prize in the room. And again, I want to welcome you all. Let me also, to honor our prize winner, mention that this year, so this was a wonderful, wonderful choice for us. This year we have embarked on a very, very adventurous program of research on the Arctic, which is a 4-year commitment to make a difference on an issue that is important not only to Canada, but to all the Arctic nations and Arctic peoples, and to many beyond. We are doing this in partnership with the Walter and Duncan Gordon Foundation, and Tom Axworthy, its new president, is with us tonight. So the issue that you care about, Sheila, is an issue that we care about as well, and I invite everybody to continue to join us and watch this research program as it unfolds. Let me say a special word of welcome to Rachel Lomax, who is one of our jurors, who came from England today, especially for the prize. So welcome to you, Rachel. We're just delighted. She was a superb juror. She was just a superb juror. I sit at the end of the phone and listen to the conversations and say nothing. But I can't say now what a treat it was to have you. Is Mark here? Oh, great. And at the back, wave again, Mark, stand up, because you're too far in the back, is Mark Starowitz, who has served on the Gelber jury for 2 years. And I always wait with great interest. Mark is the best kind of juror, by the way. He's unpredictable, right? And that's what you always want in a juror. I can never tell where Mark is going to land. And Mark fulfilled all expectations and kept the suspense going until the very last minute. So these are, if you would just applaud these two jurors who do this on a voluntary basis. We are missing two others, David Frum, who this evening is touring campus sites with his son, who is just ready to go to university, and Stephen Weber from Berkeley, who was unable to be with us tonight. He is in Brazil. But you can see what a wonderful jury we had. And its chair, who is here, Paul Cadario. What to say about Paul's? His formal position is at the World Bank, where Paul works on the small issue of accountability internationally for the trusts that the World Bank runs. He does this with ease and grace, and I'm awed, in fact, by the way he does it. But there is another side to Paul. Paul is Canadian. He was just recently president of the Associates of the University of Toronto. So there's a lifetime of service to his university. He is on the board of our School of Public Policy and Governance, and he is on the board of the Monk School of Global Affairs. So this is a person who gives of his time with the greatest generosity. And when I went to him and said, Paul, would you chair the Gelber jury? He said, how wonderful. Now, what more can you ask? Please welcome Paul Cadario. He's going to talk about our writers. Paul.
Thank you, Janice, for your generous introduction and for the acknowledgement of the jury process, which I had never done before for a book prize, and it was really quite fun. It was even more fun to chat with Janice afterwards about what had just happened. Let me first talk about the other 4 books that were on the short list, books of great achievement. Yalta, The Price of Peace by Professor Serhii Plohe is a seminal treatment of a profoundly important moment in history, the run-up to the Cold War. Drawing on Russian archives, he has created a work of outstanding scholarship. He brings to light important interpretations of the transition from global war to a sort of world peace. His version of Yalta also reminds us how important it is for negotiators to know their allies and not just try to figure out their adversaries. Stanford scholar Ian Morris's grand sweep through history raises provocative issues about the future of the global system. Why the West Rules, for now, looks at how geography and natural resources have shaped the patterns of global wealth and power from ancient times to the present. Whether you believe the world is flat or has peaks, in our era of globalization and its challenges, his self-confident theory of world history makes us all think very hard about the future. In his Arrival City, The Final Migration and Our Next World, London-based Globe and Mail journalist Doug Saunders offers an original treatment of global migration, one of the most important issues of our time. Saunders takes us inside megacities. His rich storytelling and robust framing gives us a granular description of the neighborhoods around the world that allow people to refashion their lives, and he provides a model of how global migration reshapes the cities they come from and transforms the cities where they end up. Historian Nick Calather offers a daring corrective to those who write about history as population control in his The Hungry World, America's Cold War Battle Against Poverty in Asia. This timely history of the Green Revolution is an important and masterful blend of politics and science. Going back to when international development offered a new, radical tool to assure the security of the West in Asia, it teaches us important lessons when we think hard about global poverty, research, hunger, and food security. In this very strong field of provocative, readable, and lasting works, our winner, Sheila Grant's Polar Imperative, stood out. Based on archival research, her riveting history of adventure, sovereignty, and environment around the Arctic Ocean is a comprehensive account of the interplay of politics, economics, institutions, and culture in a part of the world that very few of us have ever experienced firsthand. Today, the Arctic is front and center on the global agenda. Professor Grant provides a vital history of competing claims to sovereignty, documenting what the 24-hour news cycle would call the backstory on diplomatic and military events over the last 2 centuries. As climate change melts the polar ice cap and, for the first time, makes competition for undersea resources possible in a fragile ecosystem, Grant also reshapes our mental model of what the world's important borders are and what are the vital global trade routes. Her book is a must-read background for what could well become the next great game. For anyone interested in understanding why the world's attention is shifting north and why what happened in the past is not necessarily a guide to what will happen in the decades to come. Sheila Grant lives in Peterborough and she teaches at Trent. Her previous publications include a book on government policy in the Canadian North during the war and post-war years, as well as scholarly articles on Arctic-related topics, including sovereignty and environmental issues and Inuit oral history. In 1997, she became the first historian and the first woman to receive the Northern Science Award, sponsored by Canada's Department of Indian and Northern Affairs. Sheila Grant, the winner of the Lionel Gelber Prize.
Thank you. When I wrote Polar Imperative, it was because I honestly believe that the mistakes in the past are repeated because people don't know their history. And in terms of Arctic sovereignty, there were a lot of gaps. And quite frankly, I was hoping to write a book that would reach a general audience, informed, educated, no, not informed, educated, but perhaps uninformed. So winning the Gelber Prize has more or less made that objective much closer to reality. And I am really greatly honored, but I'm also, for that other reason, doubly grateful. Thank you, from the heart. My talk this evening, well, touch, is cut in half, okay? In one word, we are going to dispense with most of the history, which is what I know most about, and time-wise, but I just wanted to say, in the book, probably the highlight for me, which I will run to, has been the archival research and finding documents that hadn't come forward before. How do I know much about the Arctic? Well, I started sovereignty with an undergrad essay in 1978 on the Canal Road. And from there, research for my master's thesis, which went on to the first book that I published was, you mentioned, Sovereignty or Security. How could I ever forget that? Policy in the Canadian North. Now, before that book was published, and I just wanted to get this in 1984, I participated in a study group with the former Canadian Institute of International Affairs. And that trip took me to Baffin Island, to the Svalbard Islands, to Greenland, four places in Greenland. And that had an incredible influence on my Depression, so my interest in northern sovereignty all of a sudden moved further north, the ultimate Thule. So I'm going to jump at this point. The book, in one word, begins before man existed on the planet, and it shows a number of factors, basically, that affected Arctic sovereignty, the status of it over the years. I'm talking about climate change, wars, economic adversity, and demand for resources. Now, this book is different only that it's comparative methodology and the definitions I use for sovereignty. The political scientists might take me to task because I use both de jure sovereignty, which is the legal interpretation of the supreme right of governance, but I talk about de facto sovereignty, and that is a generic term which is describing power in fact, but without any political legal right. And that can be when you lose control, say, both Denmark during, in Greenland during World War II, and when we had to sort of let the Americans really look after our military concerns during World War II. Now, and quite frankly, when I wrote that first book, I was somewhat a little anti-American. And then I'm going to jump right here. For the real history, the hardcore history, you're going to have to go and thumb through those pages. But I want to jump to why I all of a sudden realized that in World War II, if it hadn't been for the United States carrying the continental defense prior to their entry into the war, we would have had Germans in Greenland and I suspect in Arctic Canada. So you're just going to have to close your eyes for a minute. This is the history part. There we go. Actually, I'm going to go back. This is a picture of the Bear. It was a Coast Guard that was part of the Greenland Coast Guard. It actually is 60 years old, and they had taken down the mast, reinforced the hull, put absolutely, I can't believe this is 60 years old. This one was part of the Greeley expedition rescue in 1880s. And so this is what was the Greenland Patrol. And by comparison, and there was the Eastern Sled Patrol, and it was basically, yes, they did capture one German ship and had to turn it right over to the British because they were neutral. They couldn't do anything. Anyway, by comparison, the only Canadian vessel, government vessel, capable of sailing in the ice-strewn Arctic waters was the RCMP St. Roch. And the ship is seen here caught in the ice while attempting to traverse the Northwest Passage from Vancouver on a mission to protect Canadian interests in the Eastern Arctic. In the end, it took the ship 3 years to get through the passage. By then, the United States had entered the war following the bombing of Pearl Harbor and was responsible for major military activities in the Canadian Northwest, Arctic Canada, and Greenland. And I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to show you, is the German threat real? One example, and this was after the U.S. were in the war. It's 1943. A German ship carrying troops and supplies had landed on the east coast of Greenland. Was spotted by the U.S. Air Force, and they had a bombing raid from Iceland. When the U.S. Coast Guard reached the site the next spring, they discovered that all surviving Germans had been evacuated, how they're not sure, and the ship burned. Canadian and Danish intentions to remove the U.S. military from the soil after the war came to an abrupt halt after the Soviet Union's successful test of an atomic bomb. But in this extent, I don't think we might have had a much different war. We don't know because it never happened, but we thank you. So, both the Danes and the Canadians attempted to retrieve all the permanent facilities that were built by the U.S. And there was a concern, no question about sovereign and sovereign rights. And we tend to associate the post-war and Cold War with the dew line. This is the dye station in Greenland. But for Americans posted in the Arctic during the Cold War, it was probably considered an adventure on a new frontier, and with infinite funding for science and military research. Now, example, this isn't Dieppe or Normandy, and this is the year 1951, and the unloading of supplies for Operation Blue Jay, the code name for the construction of the Thule Air Base in northern Greenland, which was built, staffed, and operated by the USA Air Force. And within 18 months, the base was virtually completed and ready to house up to 20,000 officers and men. This view doesn't show the massive runway, the submarine port, the radar sites, the nuclear missile launch pads, as well as additional camps called Camp Tutu, Camp Fisklench, and Camp Century. The latter was built into the glacier and fueled by a nuclear generator. From Thule, large B-52 bombers patrolled the airways in search of enemy planes and submarines. Only after one crashed on the ice just west of the base did Greenlanders and Danes realize that they routinely carried nuclear bombs. Now, this is one of the more ambitious American experiments. It was called Project Iceworm, a plan to build a series of ice tunnels under the Greenland Glacier to allow a mobile nuclear missile launchers to travel undetected under the glacier should Thule Air Base be attacked by the Soviets. Well, this was in 56. It ended abruptly when the glacier collapsed the walls. And in fact, Camp Century, which was supposed to be this great city under ice, met a similar fate and was closed permanently within 6 years of completion. So planes scoured the skies for potential Soviet invaders, but American and British subs were traveling undetected, mostly under the ice. And on more than one occasion, I'm putting in this because I love the picture, they surfaced at the North Pole. And in the background there, we see the U.S. Pargo. And in the foreground, Britain's HMS Tireless. And if you notice a little spot just to your right of the Tireless's conning tower, you will see that they had laid out a cricket field. A crew member, actually, of the British sub provided me with this photo, and he verified that it did take place, but he wouldn't tell me who won. Well, this is not to trivialize dangers of submarine travel in the Arctic. Several years ago on that same Tireless, they had an explosion in Lancaster Sound and lost 2 men. So it's not that simple, but okay. Then we've got a flurry. It's excitement. Oil's discovered in Prudhoe Bay, 1968. And of course, the confrontation with the United States over the SS Manhattan, going through the Northwest Passage without official request from the State Department. It's an interesting, read the story. But Canada's response was to legislate the Arctic Waters Pollution Prevention Act, which set down strict regulations for foreign and domestic shipping, and they've been upgrading those over the years. And eventually, most were accepted and incorporated in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And my argument is, can we enforce them? And that's why I've got that there. But there was also the voyage of the U.S. Coast Guard, Polar Sea, through the Northwest Passage in 1985. Again, they didn't ask for permission. But in response, Canada drew the lines around the Arctic islands and declared all the waters within internal waters. Now, this was followed 3 years later, 1988, with a Canada-U.S. cooperation agreement that allowed unrestricted transit of American ships through the Northwest Passage, with the two countries basically agreeing to disagree on its status. Well, we have another outcome of this oil. Concerned with the drilling activity and increased tanker traffic that would affect their wildlife, the Inuit of Greenland, Canada, and Alaska joined together to create the Inuit Circumpolar Conference, now called Council. Now, if this picture here, I'm talking about how far they've got. It's the tenacity of the leaders, their ability to stick with it and drive. And if you look at this picture, this is the 1980 Executive Committee. 4 of them there have been presidents of the international presidents of the ICC. The lone woman is one Mary Simon, who was our circumpolar ambassador, and many other titles as well. She was a president too. And beside her is John M. McGualick. It's a tribute to them, really, that it has gone so far. And as far as the Inuit are concerned, the map of the Arctic did change in a major way, as Alaska Eskimos, Canadian Inuit, and Greenlanders steadily acquired forms of self-government, encompassing the entire North American Arctic, basically. And we've got borough government in Alaska. We've got regional self-government in the Western Arctic and Northern Quebec and Labrador. We've got Nunavut Territory, and we've got the new self-rule government in Greenland. It's an extraordinary accomplishment in less than 30 years. So, 21st century, here we are. And I use this quote because it struck me when Sheila Wacluccier said it. You were at the conference, Franklin. Arctic sovereignty and global warming are two sides of the same coin. And basically, what she was saying, that the melting ice that once protected Canadian sovereignty over Arctic waters has exposed the fact that Canada may have insufficient ships, manpower, infrastructure to enforce its own regulations, given the increase in commercial shipping. And right now, I'm not talking about the Northwest Passage. I'm talking the shipping in and out of the Arctic, east and west. I'm going to miss, that's the disputed. You've probably seen hundreds of maps, and you can ask me about that later. But what are the issues? Hans Island. I love that picture. That's what it is, a rock. A big hunk, 1.3 kilometers of rock, right in the middle between Ellesmere Island and Greenland. And the dispute will ultimately be settled by scientific data as far as where is the end of the, whose continental shelf, etc. They don't know whether you could drill on it because there's no seismic tests allowed until they settle the dispute. Anyway, but there are other causes of, the other side of the coin. There are problems with pollution, but also we've got benefits from melting ice. And we've got more potential economic projects being discussed and started already than has happened in any last 2 or 3 years, I think, in the history of the Arctic. And this is the Mary River Camp, iron ore mine, a northern Baffin, totally isolated area. And it's only one of the many new projects that are already starting in Arctic Canada. And this is what is contributing to increased shipping, not only to get oil and equipment in, to get product out. And the Conference Board of Canada has forecast the growth of a new Arctic economy. But my argument is we must be sure, number one, that it's sustainable. Number two, that it's of direct benefit to the people who live there, the Inuit, and not a major source of pollution. That's a responsibility, and I will argue that sovereignty is not just a right, it's also a responsibility. Greenland has even more projects underway, by the way. I mean, their ice cap is melting faster, and Alcan's up there in a uranium mine, rubies, gold, the list just goes on. Extraordinary. Well, My argument, though, is that the residents of Greenland have a more substantial infrastructure already to support the activity. And there is a third of the capital of Nuuk in Greenland. There's the second third. The deep sea port and the airport are out of the picture. And Greenland had a referendum in 2008 and overwhelmingly supported eventual independence from Denmark. But this will only happen if the Greenland government can generate enough revenue from resource development to no longer depend on Danish quotas. Sorry. The rapid ice melt is bringing that closer to reality. Now, this is the deep sea port that was out of sight in Nuuk, and for refueling, emergency repairs. And I think Canada really should have several of these. We'd be lucky if we get one, and I don't know whether the one up in Nanisivik is going to help anything more than the training center for the military up in Resolute. It's way far away. As I say, fleet of icebreakers. Okay, this is 1990. It's old, right? And there's the Yamal, which has got the shark's teeth, the Russian nuclear sub in the forefront at the North Pole, Canada's Louis Saint Laurent, and United States Polar Star. Sorry, that's the star. China, Russia's superiority may be questioned soon. China, I found out from the Senate report, it wasn't building, it has built, and it's been in operation according to their Senate report, and I'm still going to double check this one, since 1995. And it arrived at Tuktoyaktuk in the Western Arctic without any Canadian officials realizing it was in Canadian waters. That part I knew. I didn't think it was the big one. They also have smaller ones under construction. As I say, that's the Senate report. I've got to go back and trace their sources. China has also requested observer status in the Arctic Council, with known interests in northern shipping lanes, mineral resources, and fishing rights. And I think we just have to rethink, forget the Cold War, forget the old enemies, and start thinking a global economy and start thinking about Canada. Now, as well, the melting ice, we don't just offshore drilling. Now, that's an old one. There's an error in that book. That's not 2006. Apology from the photographer. He says, oh no, that was the copyright date. It's 1989. Yeah. And it's the Kulik drill rig. The corporate icebreakers probably in that time were Petro-Canada, but by this time I wasn't going to trust the photographer, even if he took the picture. Last July, the Canadian Senate approved the drilling of a deep sea well by ExxonMobil in the northern portion of the Beaufort Sea. I've been watching that one for a while. Now, Prime Minister Harper has since announced that this drilling project will be deferred until 2014 to ensure all safety provisions are in place. But an oil spill, even half of what was in the recent Gulf of Mexico, would be a total disaster. Number one, oil does not respect marine boundaries. Once it's under the ice, or it's gone. But last October, the U.S. Coast Guard reported to Congress, October 10th to be exact, that they do not have the technology, equipment, manpower, or ships to deal with a major oil spill in the Beaufort Sea. So we can't count on help from them. It's a different technology than they have in the Gulf of Mexico. And that's not the only problem. This is a breakup of an oil tanker. The photo was actually distributed by the U.S. Coast Guard in an attempt to promote the need for more icebreakers. And this one was off the coast of Alaska, not up into the Arctic waters, but most Canadians have heard about the cruise ship that ran aground in the Coronation Gulf last year, but not the two other mid-sized oil tankers that went aground, I don't think. According to the cruise ship, according to the interim report of the Senate Committee on Arctic Sovereignty and Security that just came out last week, the grounding of this Clipper adventure brought to light three major gaps in Canada's Arctic policy. The lack of charting that meets modern international standards, and the warning that such charts will not be available for more than 10% of the Arctic waters anytime soon because of costs. Secondly, there's a serious problems executing a major search and rescue operations in a timely fashion. I'll come back to that one. And the lack of any regulation requiring vessels to use an experienced marine pilot to guide them through dangerous waters. Now, just dangerous waters, that looks like safe, right? We had just come through that. You get a wind up, you get ice back, you get changes, and you see that little shadow under there? The ice underneath the water is the trouble, not what you see on top. I just want to talk about search and rescue. SAR, they call it SAR for short. There are 3 joint rescue coordination centers, and I think Lieutenant Colonel Kelderman can verify this for me, but this is what I got from the Senate report. Trenton, Victoria, and Halifax. Their aircraft consist of C-130 Hercules and twin-engine C-115 Buffaloes, which are both relics of the 1960s. All are based in the south: Comox, Winnipeg, Trenton, Nova Scotia, and Gander. And plans were to replace these. It was reported to Senate in 2004, but delayed because of cost, and at the time they thought it was a low priority. And according to their report, it's no longer on the procurement list. Now, Franklin would know much more about the status of this than I would. Also, my argument is the exact location of the grounded cruise ship was identified by a helicopter within a few hours, but the closest Canadian Coast Guard vessel was 500 kilometers away, and it took 48 hours to get there. Thank goodness they didn't have to get off quickly. Okay, Operation Nanook last year. I have no argument that we need to have our troops learn to defend Arctic Canada. But I argue that Arctic Canada is part of Canada just as much as the East Coast, the West Coast, and I don't like hearing about it being to assert Arctic sovereignty or the costs attributed to assertion of Arctic sovereignty. That's national defense. Last year, the military exercises were joined by the U.S. Navy, Coast Guard, and Danish Navy. And while similarly, I agree that Canada needs to replace its fighter jets in the Arctic, or its fighter jets, but they don't need those fighter jets in the Arctic. What they need are these fixed-wing ones for search and rescue. We need major investment in other areas, such as more icebreakers to carry out the current functions of the Coast Guard. And aside from regular icebreaking assistance for military vessels, cargo, and fuel supply, the Coast Guard is responsible for oil spill cleanup, safety inspections, navigational aids, ship traffic control, customs regulations, as well as providing support for scientific research and search and rescue. As commercial shipping increases, their workload increases. And just replacing this Louis Saint Laurent with the Diefenbaker in 2017 is not going to do it. Now, this is the problem, and it's symbolic. Do we have Coast Guard or do we have frigate? And that, I'm going to leave you to debate that one. We could maybe cover it. It's been debated in Senate, but I just wanted to say that the Senate recommendations were, it's too late in the game for the government to consider such a big change in plans, unquote. And then I looked at the mandate. Recommendations are doable in a fiscal climate of austerity. In other words, if it costs money, we don't do it. We don't recommend it. coming right down to, we're covered with Thule Air Base, the BMUs, the SOC. Alert is a little tiny in that sort of focus, but it's there, and it pays important communications and services. But we also have to think of a responsibility when we're talking about the Arctic. And this is called education, retraining, and for the Inuit. As Canadians, my argument is conclusion, we should not allow others to benefit from exploitation of Arctic resources at their expense, at the Inuit expense. The future of the Arctic may be in the hands of government leaders, but I firmly believe it's up to all Canadians, Americans, Danes, and Greenlanders to demand responsible action. Thank you. Sorry if I've gone over.
So much. I'm going to let you sit down, have a glass of water, and
Yeah.
answer your question.
I would, that's right.
Thank you so much, Sheila. I don't know about the rest of you, but leaving aside the contents of the lecture and the importance of the issues that Sheila has raised, the pictures are absolutely spectacular. Many of these are unavailable. It's through a lifetime of research that Sheila has found these, and they are a treasure. The issues that Sheila put on the agenda, search and rescue, how we think about security, what the implications are for the Arctic peoples are really, I think, and this is not only a Canadian issue, as Sheila put it, but this is increasingly a global issue. It's really interesting because in my own work in both Japan and China, you would not think of these as Arctic countries, but they are investing inordinate amounts of money in research on the Arctic, in the science of the Arctic, and there's probably greater awareness in the research community in China and Japan than there is in Canada. And that's not a happy story. Our front of house staff is now going to circulate in the room. And if you have a question for Sheila, she is graciously agreed to answer it. And we have about 15 minutes for conversation, so don't hold back. And while they're doing that, I'm going to give a heads up. I'm going to ask Franklin Griffiths to start us off first and Tom Axworthy to start us off, to follow Franklin with a question or a comment. And if you would just put your hands up, Lauren will move through the room and you can write a question down. Lauren will bring it to me and we will ask Sheila. But Franklin, start us off.
Thank you. I'll just stand here, Frank. Sheila, that was fabulous, and I agree about the pictures. Glorious. It bring the book to life. You spoke comprehensively and thoroughly and wisely. I don't know that I would add a lot. Perhaps to ask about the military uses of the Arctic as you see it. What lies ahead here in your estimations in the use of the deep Arctic Ocean waters by submarines? And the Chinese Navy, for instance, is that not going to appear sooner or later? And when the ice is really thinned out in the summers, do we in Canada have a major security problem cropping up in being able to defend that vast archipelago of ours with all of its entry and exit points against foreign submarines who maybe should not be there, who may be seeking sanctuary, who knows what. But in a world that is rather different, I guess my question is to not have a major interest as time goes on in a cooperative Arctic, where the military competition fear is diminished.
So did everybody hear Franklin's question? I'm just going to repeat the last sentence. The question to Sheila was, does she not think that as the Arctic changes and the environment changes, do we not have a major interest in a cooperative Arctic? Essentially, is the Arctic not a global commons? Let me put it that way. Sheila.
You know, Thank you, Franklin. I respect your views and opinions very much. And I think the bottom line, you almost answered it, is the answer is cooperative. And we have NORAD, which looks after our air space. We've the U.S. Submarines and NATO, to some extent, have been looking after the water. We've got radar satellite coming on. But it all depends on coordination. And I did write in an op-ed that I really wondered whether we're going to have to look after the Arctic waters in a cooperative way, very much like NORAD, defense-wise. But perhaps we should be, they've already got a search and rescue agreement that's drafted out. It's been a little delayed getting the final touches on it. This is where we have to go. So it's Arctic Council cooperation, and it's if we can get the 8 countries, or at least the Arctic 5, talking together and cooperating, that is going to be the answer. Military, China's a little bit of a wild card yet. I'm a historian. I'll leave that to the political scientists.
I'm going to go to Tom Axford next, and then to the 2 jurors who read. It's such a generous way for us. And then I'll go to the floor. So Tom, and then Mark, and then Rachel. And then we will use whatever time that we have left. Tom.
Your book is called Polar Imperative, and your talk emphasized problems of the 21st century. But as a historian, you didn't have it in this talk, but it certainly is in the book, that our northern policy and our polar policy is best characterized by stop and go, mostly stop. And that several times in our history, there has been interest in the Arctic, icebreakers are begun, and then sooner or later, usually sooner, the beam counters win, the plans are put on the shelf to be unveiled again in another 20 years. So my question to you, if polar is really so imperative to us, what is your explanation for southerners and decision makers never following through on the Arctic objectives and priorities that they announce in the press release never get treasured?
Wow. A loaded question, and the bottom line, I think, is that we started out, which I tried to show, oh no, you didn't see it. We started out as Canada with a huge, one of the world's largest countries and one of the smallest populations, and without much money to look after it, let alone develop the Arctic. We have always been in a debt as far as what we should have done and what we should have actually invested in protecting the Arctic. We are behind. We were protected sovereignty-wise by the ice cover, and it melted. So all of a sudden, we're caught with the reality that we're way behind, and I don't think any government is going to win popular support by saying we should spend it in the Arctic, anything that we've got left over. We've got a dilemma. And that I touch on that because it's a multicultural country we have that we didn't have when they got all upset about losing the Alaska boundary. We've got a multicultural country that live primarily in urban centers, and I really am concerned whether we might give it up or abandon it, like Russia sold Alaska to the U.S. because they couldn't afford to look after the Russian American anymore. So that's why I wrote the book. I want to see, I want Canadians to understand, I want other people to understand, and then let's be where it may. But I tried. I think all of us should try. Thank you, Tom.
Mark. Mark's question was also a question that I had from Marion Botsford Fraser. So,
Yes, it's the two-edged sword in a way. If they can get past the suicide, the dislocation, the unemployment, I have watched, and John will bear with me, some of the most extraordinary examples of what I call innate intelligence. Not, and I don't like the word intelligence. Peter Pitzlak, who was manager of the airport at Kimaru, we were stuck there. He took us into a back hangar and showed us 2 light craft he had built himself. And we said, well, how? And he said, well, they had instructions, and I laid everything out. And he said, but I had to go back to school because they put new regulation that I had to get a license, and I couldn't read English to pass the test. He passed the test. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. The plane crashed, but it's the power of observation. Those that will make it will be incredible ability. There's a lot of work to be done on inspiring and getting them into right slots and getting them to believe you don't just have to be an administrator. You can be the best carpenter, you can be the best cook and bottle washer, but that they're all needed and that they're all part of the new Arctic. I think we can do it. Eva Ariak, Mary Simon, they're, and don't ask me why there are more women leaders at the moment, but I think it has something to do with they're all interested in what's going to happen to their grandchildren, in very simple terms. Does that answer enough, Mark? Okay, thank you.
thank you, Sheila. By the way, for anybody who knows Mary Simon, who was our first Arctic ambassador, that's absolutely just a wonderful picture of a young Mary. I've never seen it before. It was absolutely a gem, Sheila. Rachel Lomax. Japanese. So Rachel Lomax's question is,
Yeah.
so in case anybody couldn't hear, Rachel's question is why the Chinese and Japanese interest. Could Sheila elaborate on that? The Chinese are so visible in Africa and other parts of the world. How does Sheila think about these 2 non-traditional powers who have deep interests in the Arctic? How do you see their role?
Yeah, what I think I mentioned that China has requested to be a permanent observer. I'm not sure whether Japan's on that list too, but yes, it's resources. And the Arctic, for both Japanese and Chinese, it's also fish. It's something we don't realize. But and Greenland has caught some illegal fishing off their shores. But it's also minerals. And China, particularly, per Japan right now, I think they need everything for yesterday. But you'll see, but they were always been interested in the Arctic. They have an Arctic Center in Japan. Mm-hmm. And so does China, a big one. Yes, they are interested, and there was an alarming comment by a retired admiral that did make the comment, well, the Arctic belongs to all of us, not... nobody's believing that, but we have to be, it's cooperation, but we've got to protect the place when we have a rush of new business and new effort. The Chinese will do the same as they've done in Africa. They'll invest in companies, and I think they've tried to take a part of the Baffin Island. I haven't got the final, they won't let me know who the buyers were on that. Thank you.
You know, Sheila's answer actually plays into some research that we did with the Walter and Duncan Gordon Foundation. You saw it, where we did a poll, I think, for the non-Canadians. Canadians came out in that poll as completely atypical, least willing to cooperate of any of the Arctic nations on any of these issues, most assertive in terms of defense, whatever that means, of rights. And it was a stunning result. We didn't expect it. As we talk about collaboration and cooperation, it's one of the very few issues in which we Canadians are outliers on a global issue. So that's something I think that we want to continue to think about. And this next question, Sheila, and I know we rushed you through this, so I'm glad this one came up. What about the Northwest Passage? Do you believe that, so this plays exactly into this sense, do you believe that Canadians have a valid claim? And what are the consequences of our continuing to assert it for other straits globally, whether they're the Straits of Hormuz or the Straits of Malacca, if we continue to assert that this is in fact a national waterway rather than an international waterway?
Oh boy.
That's a beaut.
No, I won't give you the 10-minute version. I'll try on this minute and a half. It will depend on the amount of traffic, whether that they actually can declare it. It's more important to get the rights and the restrictions on shipping through there in place before we even discuss. I really take another look at totally at the Northwest Passage. If you wind down through whichever way on the Canadian side, it's narrow, it's torturous, and it's probably going to take as long to go at a slow pace as through the Panama Canal. The thing is, the climate, the sea cover, the ice is melting so fast, the most rapidly this summer, that I expect that it's going to be open over the North Pole, and that's going to be the quickest route, and without hazards. Then we've got something else to worry about. How are we going to get the marine regulations and safety inspections on that? Because water moves south.
So we have time for 2 more questions because we are standing between you and the reception here. Before I go to the last 2 questions, let me just make 2 comments. One, to introduce you to Scott McIntyre. Scott McIntyre is one of these vanishing breeds, a Canadian publisher who publishes books that we all care about. So Scott, if you stand up for a moment and just identify yourself. And of course, Scott published Sheila's book. So without Sheila, there would not be this wonderful story of a part of the world that is so important, not only to us, but without Scott, there wouldn't be this wonderful book. I also want to take just a minute to thank Lucinda Lee, who works at the Munk School of Global Affairs and works on this prize from the beginning as we begin to get the books early in the fall, and sees the process through. It's not the only thing she does for us, but a thank you to Lucinda for all the wonderful work that you do for us, Lucinda. Let me ask one question and then leave the last one to Paul as chair of the jury. And you know, when you're jurors and you read these books, you have so many questions as you read, and we have discussions like, I wish the authors had, right, Marion? I wish the authors had. So that's the only reward we can give these jurors, to allow them to ask the author. There's an interesting question. Tell us what you found. How did you get the classified documents? Because this is the authoritative history of the Arctic, there's no question. When you read the early reviews of the book, this becomes the seminal history of the Arctic. And part of the vision of the Lionel Gelber Prize is to choose books that will continue, that will live past the annual publishing cycle, and this book certainly does. And part of the reason it does, it is full of this extraordinary archival research, which took Sheila her whole life. Now, how did you get the classified documents?
The classified documents, they were difficult. Actually, I don't I was either on the edge when they became declassified, or I got them before somebody decided to classify them. I found out in a couple of them, oh, you shouldn't have had that document. I do. I was Curious George the monkey. I get one answer and I've got 10 questions, and I never knew enough to stop. And I have more material than I could possibly ever use. But it's extraordinary how the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle go together. Just because a document is classified does not mean there's a secret you can't get at. And I did play the triangles. What I couldn't get in the Canadian Archives on my first book, I was in Washington. Oh, yes. They didn't think it was should be censored or that. It's there. Or in London. I found a lot in London. So I just played the triangle. And that's probably what started me on comparative methodology. Compare. And you'd be surprised where you find the answers.
That's a wonderful answer. It really is. And I think what you heard there from Sheila is this overwhelming curiosity. And I think the spirit that animates anyone who does this kind of work, I never knew enough to stop. That's just a wonderful, wonderful comment, Sheila. Paul, the last question to you.
I'm going to try to connect two dots from your quote from Sheila Watt-Cloutier about climate change and Native people. If we look at, I was very struck by your map of North America with all the various Native people sort of as if they were statelets, if you will. And if we look at the climate change negotiations, which have at their underpinnings a lot of use of resources, energy, to try to stop global warming, that's all about discussions between countries. But there's also a long history in the Arctic of the Native people in all those countries sort of having contacts that are more about their being Inuit than they are about being passport holders of the countries where they happen to live. I know you're not a political scientist, but if you were, would you see that maybe this is a new dimension? It opens a new front in the climate change negotiations because you have an interest group called Inuit and a resource that could figure quite prominently in the discussion about how to avert global warming, because once the ice is gone, there's all sorts of other stuff there that could make it worse.
There's two answers to that. Because the Inuit, quite frankly, are quite divided on the subject. There's advantages of that ice melting, but they are not pro pollution or wasteful of energy. But some people see massive development because of the ice will make their new economy, as they call it. And I think there is probably a good chance they will have, whether it's 30 years, 20 years. It all depends, as I said, as Canadians, I'm looking at Canada, I think the US and Denmark both share their resource revenue with Greenland and Alaskans through their land claims. No, we're still in the colonial stage. There's been some breakthroughs of getting royalty on some projects, but we still, the revenue from the exploration and production, it goes right into the treasury. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a little bit of colonialism, and I think it's going to change as soon as they realize that Canada's not moving on this. They want more control. They want to share. They're not saying we want it all. They want to share. Will they play a major part? They can on the climate change part because they know that even if we had the strictest carbon stopping everything today and could turn the back, sort of, we still can't reverse what's happening in the Arctic right now, and probably not in 100 years. At least that's what the scientists say. Okay, I'm a historian. Yeah, it's a dilemma there, but The other thing I will say about the Inuit, they're adaptable. They're incredibly adaptable. That's how they've survived. And we may have to adapt to them.
Before we actually present Sheila with the prize, which we're going to do in a minute, I want to thank our jurors again, but I especially want to thank our author. She chose a brilliant subject to write about. It is a part of the world that is of great interest to Canadians, but not only to Canadians. It is a global issue because it is just at the edge of the frontier that is opening. And this book stands really as the authoritative history of an issue that is increasingly of global concern. I think it's a particularly important book for Canadians to read because we are not in the lead. We are not at the forefront of research, which we should be. We are not at the forefront in building the kinds of relationships with Inuit peoples that other Arctic countries are. Despite all the mythology that surrounds this subject, I think when you finish reading Sheila's book, you will understand that we have a great deal of work to do. And any book that can make you feel that way, we are grateful to the author for writing it. It's also just a treasure trove, if you haven't read the book, of these wonderful photographs and wonderful stories, which certainly I was enriched when I read the book. So thank you so much, Sheila. I'm going to ask Lionel Gelber to come to the front. There is actually a prize, Sheila. You actually get a prize.
This is not a piece of Inuit art. This might help you buy some more if you don't have enough already.
Or towards educating some Inuit.
That would be lovely.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. As I say, I'm writing the book. It's where it goes from here, and if I can inspire 10 PhD theses out of this, if I can inspire all of you here in the room that wouldn't be here unless you were interested and concerned about the Arctic, to think, maybe I can do my bit. It's not going to happen all by itself, and this book's not going to happen. But if it's called cooperation, but it's coordination. And thank you from my heart.
So a warm thank you again to Sheila Krant. A warm thank you to Paul, to Mark, and to Rachel. A warm thank you to the many, many friends of both the Gelber family and the Gelber Prize. I see so many old friends in the room, and it's always wonderful to see you. Please join Sheila. On your way to the reception, there is a book table. And Sheila's book is for sale, as are the 4 other shortlisted books, which are must-reads for people interested in global issues. So as you're wandering through to the reception, stop at the book table before you get to the wine and the hors d'oeuvres. Thank you all again, and please join us.
Paul, I didn't get a chance to thank you for I was told I wasn't supposed to make big speeches.
Very nice.
But, if it was to cause debate and discussion.
Well, certainly, I think the whole climate change thing, and because if you look at it, we'll get a chance to talk more at dinner about this, but climate change negotiations are focused on forests, and then they added people in living areas. Well, if you look at, okay, so how does that differ from ice and people live beside it? So you've got ecosystem services. If you take that as well as the climate treaty, then you could look at people that, in all the right areas in the Arctic Ocean, we all have a role and say, well, how are we going to live and treat when it comes down to politics and climate change?
I know. I would say we have both minds.
Right. We do this all. I hear this all the time. But I guess we sort of, and I will go back and I'll say to our climate person, well, why aren't we worried about food? We're worried about people who live in the Brazilian rainforest. I think they probably got somewhere set up. Yeah.
I will.
Yes. But I better let you meet your fans.
Well, I have to let my daughter go because she has to.
Oh, okay. Well, all right.
And I love the dog.
No.